You're very welcome back. And in this video, I'm going to talk about the hidden cost of inconsistency. That's an interesting title, I can tell you. There's a lot behind it. I'm starting out with a question. What's actually happening, you think, when no one is watching? Most people have a second gear, um, seem to have a standby mode, if you want, a version of themselves that they switch to when the pressure's off. I don't actually have that. I don't have a second gear. I only have an A game. In everything I've ever done that mattered, I've only ever had an A game. And that A game has fitted with some, I'll have to be honest, and it hasn't fitted with others. Um, the effort I've had to introduce into my process, if you want, wasn't the 100%. People I've heard before going, that must be draining to be at that level of thinking and planning all the time. There's actually been more effort involved in shutting it down and slowing it down so that everyone else can take part in it, if I'm to be honest. And it has created friction, but it also has created massive success. The greatest achievements um, in business, it's been because I have found businesses who understand this is actually something different and something special, and we're letting it exist without trying to control it. Others have been more, they need the control element, they need to be in charge, things like that. They're not comfortable with something they don't, I suppose, align with the fact that anybody can deliver at a high level all the time in what they're doing. Something in practice that I've had. So we'll have an example of last week. I was in a training session I mentioned in the previous video, and I work to try and exclude external factors, but something got into my head, and it was to do with the housing situation. And I was working really hard, and by the way, it's a really good thing when you have those type of interruptions, because it gives you that chance to I suppose really work harder, if you want, work harder on the training session. So you've got something that's trying to get into your head, and you have to work harder to get it out. So that would be a good technical session in itself. But my mind was wandering, and it was wandering, and I couldn't get back into the process. And I just went, so first of all, is it a priority or isn't it? And actually, the housing was a priority, because shooting respectfully, it does take a back seat to some stuff in life that's a little bit more important. Um, so I stopped in mid-session. I went and I dealt with what needed to be dealt with. Sometimes, by the way, a book is a little notebook is a good thing for this too, and I have one of those. And if something's bugging the hell out of me, I write it in there. And what that does is it takes it out of my head so I can actually get through a training session. So that could be a tip if someone has stuff that they're bringing into their training session, um, with 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 the intention of trying to execute something to 100%. If it's not working, you need to block it out. So fix it rather than blocking it out is what I'd say. Resolve it and come back. And I would say, while it might have been an hour, some might say, oh, that was a failed session, you didn't achieve what you set out to achieve. I'd say what I was doing was I was honoring the session. Again, it's about quality. Again, I don't shoot lead for an hour just to go through boxes of lead. That's not the goal. It needs to be quality. And if I'm going to cod myself about the quality by answering life's problems or the questions to life problems while I'm trying to shoot, am I just doing an hour, or am I actually doing a quality hour? So for me, it was important that I stopped. And this is a part of the consistency again. So the cost of inconsistency, if I'm not going to be consistent in everything I do, it's pointless. I mean, can I even say I'm disciplined then? Or again, part of the discipline is consistency. I'd say it's not a performance standard for me. It's actually a diagnostic tool. 60 shot, we'll say, in a competition process executed to the letter, and you've got the shots 10.6, 10.6, 10.5, 10.4, 9.9, 9.7, 8.5. Now, you have to ask yourself what's going on there, because respectfully, I'd be happy with 10.6s and 10 to 10.4. We're talking about 0.01 and 0.02 of a millimeter there, but when I'm out into the nines, I know I stepped outside the process. And if I'm at an 8.5, I'd really have to wonder what's going on. The 10.5s, by the way, for anybody who hasn't followed, so the competition, uh, I'm a Paralympic rifle shooter. and one of the disciplines is 10 meter, they call it 10-meter air rifle. And the bullseye is half a millimeter in size. And that 10.6, by the way, is hitting that half a millimeter close to the dead center. So there are 10 circles within that half a millimeter of a bullseye. Half a millimeter, by the way, is the size of a ball in the ballpoint pen. And there are 10 concentric circles within that. The outside circle is 10.0. The closest to the very center is 10.9. And in my competitions, you have to be hitting 10.5 and above, or you're really not at the races at all. So if you think about it, I've got from 10.6 to 10.4, and then suddenly I'm out in nines. So something was wrong. My process was strong. I executed, I analyzed it, and it was holding. So what was the variable? I checked the rifle to see was there enough air, and what it turned out to be was the stand. It was actually collapsing underneath the rifle. Only minutely, but enough to bring the scores down. If you've executed the process to 100%, when the results jump like that, you can be certain there's something else going on. And that's the cost of consistency, and the cost of, or the investment in consistency, and also the cost of inconsistency. If you're faffing about without a solid process, and you're out there in 8 land, as we call it, instead of inside in 10 land, so you don't know what you were doing to bring about the tens anyway. You may as well have been pulling the lotto numbers out. But when you know you have a consistent process, then consistently you can expect within certain variances that the process is executing. But if something drastically comes into it, that's what inconsistency is about, where you don't know what you're doing and it's up and down, and the scores I'm in. How do you tell whether you're doing something right or doing something wrong? Or you're just shooting an hour of lead, we'll call it, instead of defining a plan for a training process within a training window, as it were. How do you measure it afterwards? An example I had, one of the banks, I won't mention names because that's probably not a healthy thing to do. I was working as a consultant or an insultant at one stage, and I was involved in the information technology side of things, needless to say, and we were moving a department out of a central bank system. And I was new to this. I'd literally only come in, and there was a process already started to try and move this. There's 20 software developers into a new building. And the decision makers, 14 decision makers from different departments were all there, and no decisions being made. Now, I come from greenfield startups where literally they were greenfield. You'd be given the projects were put 1,000 users into 2 buildings in 2 years, split them 500, connect them to a WAN. I mean, that was the nature of the beast. Quite intense. Loved it. It was literally just like running water for me. There was no work really in delivering. Um, Builders were getting on with it. The rooms where there was nothing moved. Um, I I ended up in this room with 14 decision makers. They asked, was there anyone any opinion, any input or any suggestions? And I opened my mouth, and I remember being told, I just said the thing of I'd never been in a room with 14 decision makers before and no decisions made. That was something that I hadn't experienced. And this was only 20 people we were moving. I'd been used to moving like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. On the way back down the hall, the IT manager that I was working under told me maybe I should keep my mouth shut in future. And I said, no problem. The thing was, he asked me an opinion, I gave it, and that wasn't what you want. So telling me to keep my mouth shut, I thought, okay, fair enough if that's the way it is. Now that's not a problem in itself. I got a phone call on my way to the bank centre on the Monday morning to divert back to the company that were providing the services that I was contracted under. And when I went in, I was told, I thought I was going to get it in the head, which would have been fine too, by the way, because if it doesn't align, it doesn't align. I've never forced myself in anywhere that doesn't work for me. And in this situation, I didn't feel it aligned at that stage because the suggestion I made was a valid one, or not the suggestion, but the comment. It's 14 decisions. Think about that, 14 decision makers to move 20. I'd been in porta cabins with 3 decision makers for thousands. So I had come from that environment, and here I am, and I'm being chastised over it. When I got in anyway, the consultant, the company said to me, the head of bank services wants to meet you. And I thought, okay, he's going to give me a chewing out. Went out to meet him, and he just said, I heard there was a meeting on Friday. And I said, yeah. And he said, so you seem to think that there was a problem with nobody making any decisions. And I said, look, my experiences are I'd be putting 1,000 people in 2 years. Like every month we'd be putting a couple of hundred in. That was the reality of it, and it'd be getting done. There'd be less people talking about it and more people getting it done. And he actually said to me, I don't want you going back into that environment again. And I said, you probably want to get rid of me. He says, no. He said, I actually want you to come work for me. And later on made a direct offer to me so that I could work for the bank as such, one that I was already on my way to something else at that stage, so I didn't avail of it. But what I'm trying to highlight here, by the way, is the right people in the right positions will see what you have to offer as being right, even though it doesn't work for what I'll call the mediocre. And that's why this sport, particularly, I'm heading to compete against fellow Olympians, Paralympians. They won't be given any quarter, and I won't be looking for any to be given. I'm going to compete on an even level playing field, if you want, as much as possible. And I'm bringing my process, and I know the process works. And the development we're doing now is going to feed into better outcomes. So it's for me, I have no doubt that this is all it's all part of the bigger plan, if you want, and the right people will see it. They won't be fighting it. That's a big part of it too. In the IT experience I gave you there now, the right people at the right level who were the ones who really, really, really get it. And I believe that's further up the food chain than down lower down the middle. The middle is not a place you want to be if you can avoid it. The further up the food chain you go in terms of ownership, CEO level and stuff like that, they get it because they're tired of the mediocre side of things, of how complex things are, and endless meetings with 14 people in a room trying to decide on moving 20, the equivalent of that. And they're going, why is this so difficult? And they'll get told why it's so complex and all that. Simply, like shooting. Shooting's not a complex sport unless you want it to be. Improvement is not a complex process unless you want it to be. And if you want it to be about the noise instead of the output, then that's what you'll spend most of your time at. Maybe people get annoyed. That's one of the things I thought is maybe people get annoyed because I demystify bullshit. Um, if it doesn't need to be noisy, I've heard someone say to me, you make that sound very simple, and my answer was, well, I don't get paid to make it sound more complex. Similarly, in shooting is quite a straightforward sport. Now, that's not to say there's not a lot of moving parts in it. But if you work on those instead of talking about how complex it is, you'll get further into improvement rather than, oh, if only I had this rifle or this pistol or these pellets or bullets or this sight or that sight. It's not about the gear per se. If you have the basic setup, you can do quite a lot with it. But most of the work ends up having to be done with you. And I have found the most intelligent people, the best people I've worked around are the ones who do make it simple instead of making it sound complex. I would say that the people who got the best results got out of the way. That's my experience in business. Some really nice roles over Europe, Middle East, and Africa that I managed. I found people got out of the way and said, just get at it, because that's what they expect anyway at that level, I would hope. God, if I saw a CEO who was trying to manage every element, I'd be going, yeah, he probably doesn't have a hell of a lot to do, because realistically at sea level, you tend to be trying to you take care of your own area. You're expected to. It's a grown-ups table, and no one really cares about effort. Effort's a given. The ones who try to manage were the ones who tried to slow it down. The ones who tried to contain it, they created friction and they got less. I'm a believer, by the way, if I found a hurler and I did some coaching in hurling, I didn't manage them into what I thought was the best. I watched in what they did and saw if I could actually free them up from things that were holding them back rather than telling them to slow it down. And that's even in IT. I've always been the type, I want to get people who are interested in being developed. I want them to be better than I am because God help us, if I have to be the smartest man in the room, I think I'm actually doing a disservice to whoever I'm being employed with. I own 100% of the delivery of everything I engage with. Shooting is one of the thing. It's the thing I do now, but before in project management, in IT management, I don't do the excuses because when you own every element of it, you don't have to make excuses because you're the one who gets to make the decisions on how to deliver. I mean, isn't that an amazing thing, especially in shooting? I'm the one who's responsible for every shot I take. There's nobody else can take that shot except me. And I know I'm the guy for it. There's the thing too. It's not arrogance, by the way. It's the condition for the system to work. I actually think that ownership is what makes the inconsistency impossible to hide. If you own it, inconsistency doesn't exist. It can't. Not unless you're happy for it to continue failing or never to be succeeding, more to the point. A question that I've asked before is, are the people delivering on the work or generating work about the work? When you hear people talking about how complex things are, that's where I start to glaze over. Um, I do so many hours. I do so many hours because I can't do any more and maintain the level of concentration I do, by the way. They're our units. If I could increase, and when I can increase, I absorb more. But it's not about the amount of hours, it's about what I do within the hours. If I train 60 hours a week, would that make me better? I thought so, because there's a performance peak where it just falls off after that. I would do more hours if the process that's being executed for those hours was done to the maximum. I prefer to be efficient though than to be busy, so it's not about the hours for me. I'd say that if your inputs are inconsistent, you can't isolate the failure. If you don't know what's going into it, how do you actually isolate where it broke down? If you were baking a cake and you didn't know, if you didn't have a weighing scales to measure out each element, how would you know what it was made it turn out crap in the end? You couldn't tell whether the problem is in the process or in the system. You couldn't tell what's working. You need things to fall into place at the right time. And let me tell you, when pressure comes on, things don't fall into place at the right time. And you can't build something meaningful on that. That would be me anyway. I can't. Maybe someone else can. I can't. It's not a performance problem. It's actually a visibility one. When you don't know what's working, everything becomes a guess. And you can't build the type of elite program that I'm trying to develop and build, or a high performing organization on guesses. You can't. There have to be measurables. Thank you for coming by.